In the studio today with us is Andy Miller. He's the Benton County prosecutor. Andy, welcome, and so happy to have you here to talk about this important case in our community. Yeah. Yesterday, a jury of Benton County residents came back with a murder conviction, 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. They spent 15 hours on this case over 3 days. The defendant, Fransisco Resendez Miranda, 24 years old. Andy, I would hope, what I want you to do is, I want you to start out by helping us understand what was going on between these 4 people, and I know that there were others involved that you believe, but these 4 people, that 3 people ended up dying. What was going on?
Well, unfortunately, we're probably never going to know everything that went on, but we do know that David, one of the victims, was a friend of Fransisco. We believe that David also would buy drugs from Fransisco from time to time. It appears that David went to Fransisco's apartment when he thought the Mirandas would all be at work. They were field workers during the night, and was going to steal what we think is drugs. And he had one of the victim, the non-victim, the one who went down with him, he was able to escape, and we think that Victoria and Abigail, sadly, were just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
So there were actually 4 young people that were involved in going to Fransisco's apartment?
4 people left from Pasco to go down to Umatilla. David and Marco, who was not one of the victims, and then Abigail and Victoria.
Mm-hmm. And so this initially, I mean, Fransisco lived in Umatilla. How is it that they ended up in the Tri-Cities?
Well, Fransisco used to work at Easter Day Farms, and that's where the 3 bodies were found, and it was in a very isolated location near a cornfield. It was also kind of in a depressed or downward area between 2 hills. We think that they wanted to do the murder where they knew there wouldn't be anybody around, very isolated, and since they were familiar with the Easter Day Farm area, we think that's why they chose to go there.
Mm-hmm. How was it that Resendez Miranda was identified as a suspect in the first place?
Technology. When the sheriff's office worked with the Umatilla Police Department, and they looked at videos from various convenience stores, and there was a video from the Pick-a-Pop store in Umatilla, and you see, basically it's videotape where David's car with Victoria and Marco pulls in the parking lot. Then you see the defendant, the defendant's brother, and some associates of the defendant pulled into the parking lot. And you see Abigail going from a truck to David's vehicle. And then the Umatilla Police Department was watching the video with the sheriff's detectives, and one of the officers was able to recognize Mr. Miranda.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. So I know that after the trial was over and yesterday, some of the comments that you made is that you were pleased, obviously, with the outcome, and particularly because the case was circumstantial.
It was a difficult case, and that's why I was impressed talking to the jury afterwards. I don't think they had any problems reaching a verdict. It's just that they wanted to go through all the evidence. This is different. Some trials, you have 1 or 2 key witnesses that kind of lay out the case together. Here, we had 40 witnesses, and probably 15 to 20 of them were fairly important, and we had some physical evidence. So it was a difficult case to put together. We also had a lot of witnesses who were very fearful, reluctant to testify, which you understand when this was basically all 3 were killed in execution style, triple murder, and unfortunately most of the killers are still on the loose, so the witnesses had reason to be concerned.
Mm-hmm. Why aggravated?
Washington State has a fairly complicated murder law, is that if you have a murder that has premeditated intent, that makes it first degree. And then if there are certain factors to a first degree murder case, that turns it into aggravated murder. one of the factors is if there was more than one victim in the killing, and the killings were related. And that's what we do, is called a common scheme or plan. Other factors, it would be if you kill a police officer, if you kill somebody to cover up a rape or a robbery. There's just different aggravating factors. In this case, it was effectively 3 victims.
Mm-hmm. Well, why no death penalty? 3 victims.
Well, one thing is, we think that the other suspects are in Mexico, and one thing we don't know, and to extradite from Mexico, we have to take the death penalty off the table. Mexico will not extradite anybody to the United States without the death penalty. Without the death penalty being off the table. And while we were confident we could prove that Fransisco Miranda was at least an accomplice to the murder, we couldn't prove that he was more guilty than the other people who we think are involved. And that was confirmed talking to the jury. They said the accomplice instruction was very important. So the death penalty would not have stood if we worked the death penalty for one and did not have it against other people that had been more involved. And the other thing too, one thing that we prosecutors learn is if you have a death penalty case, it should not be a circumstantial case where the evidence is at least somewhat questionable. Death penalty cases are supposed to be reserved for cases where the guilt is obvious, similar to the cases Mr. Sisavon years ago, and we certainly didn't have that there. In this case, it took 3 days to deliberate. I'm not sure they would have come back guilty if the death penalty had been on the table. I think the standard of proof sometimes is a little bit different, a little bit more challenging, and there's no doubt in my mind if we had obtained the death penalty, it would have been reversed by a couple points.
If you have a question or you want to make a comment about this case or others of Andy, don't hesitate to give us a call today. We will add you to our conversation. Our phone number is 509-547-8726. Why, I mean, I don't know that you would know this, but I'll ask it anyway. Why do you think that this defendant, Fransisco, did not leave the country with the other, I think, 3 people that you have your eye on? Why not?
I think it's a mixture. I think one is arrogance. I think that he, of the 4, may have been the most arrogant. The second motivation, we think, is that they had been working for a local farm, and he actually did go to the supervisors and tried to get the paychecks that was due to all of them. And so I think they needed the money. He also had a child here, and he had told one of the witnesses testified that he was waiting until 4 o'clock, and if his name was mentioned as a suspect, he was going to leave. I think if the sheriff's office hadn't done such an excellent job and tied up this case fairly quickly, I think even if they had been 3 hours later, I think Mr. Miranda would have been on his way to Mexico.
So he is not an American citizen?
He does, state law enforcement officers, we stay away from the immigration issues for the large part. That's a federal issue. But during the search warrant at Mr. Miranda's place, he did have a card that allowed him to be a permanent legal residence based on his work. But he does not appear that he was a citizen.
What about the other 3 suspects?
Well, we didn't. Their identification wasn't there at the time. But they clearly were born from Mexico.
We're going to take a break here, and I have other questions that I want to ask, but I certainly want to invite you to ask questions as well. Again, our phone number is 547-8726. We're back in a moment here on this Tuesday. Welcome back to Meet in the Middle on this Tuesday. It is November 24th, and in the studio with us right now is Andy Miller, Benton County Prosecutor. We're talking about the murder conviction of Fransisco Resendez Miranda, 24 years old. He is now convicted in the deaths of, violent deaths of 3 other people. And we were just talking during the break and trying to understand why there weren't 4 counts of aggravated murder, considering that one of the victims was, I believe, at least like 8 months pregnant?
Probably closer to 9.
9. So why weren't there 4 counts?
The Washington Appellate Courts had a decision a few years ago, and they said that prosecutors are not allowed under Washington state law to charge unless the baby had been born and been viable, had been breathing on its own for a certain period of time. And oddly enough, one of the sheriff's deputies, Brad Clippard, was concerned about that. He reviewed the same law that we had, and he actually tried to get that law changed in that session of the legislature. And I think for other reasons, apparently the bill didn't go anywhere. But prosecutors, like everyone else, have to follow the law, and that's the law in Washington state.
Mm-hmm.
We did charge an aggravating factor that the defendant killed Abigail knowing that she was pregnant, and that she was pregnant. And the jury did not come back with that. And you actually understand why, in that 2 or 3 of the witnesses who had seen her earlier testified that they did not know she was pregnant. So we understand why the jury came to that conclusion based on the evidence presented and based on the law in that case. I will say, though, it made absolutely no difference on the sentence. The judge will have no discretion on this case. Mr. Miranda will be sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
Mm. Does he have any history of violent crime?
Nope. Nope.
So prior to this, even being arrested by the police or the state police, I mean, you mentioned that he was arrogant. What else do we know about his character?
Well, you know, I think we had the arrogance. We know that he was two-timing because he had 2 different women that he had been living with or dating, giving conflicting alibi defenses. Though to the credit of one, she came back and before trial told us, "I have to tell you the truth," and so she backed away from the alibi. And he had given an alibi in a statement to the sheriff's office that he was with another woman. Fortunately, the sheriff's office had interviewed that woman before the defendant was able to get a hold of her from the jail, and Detective Cantu pinned her down that she did not spend the night with the defendant in question. And when we're talking about this, it's nice of you to invite me on the show, but the sheriff's office did an excellent job, especially Lee Cantu, who was the case detective, and Kristen McRoberts was the deputy prosecutor on the case, and I think she impressed everybody with her thoroughness and preparation on the case.
Mm-hmm. So, bottom line, this was about drugs, and over and over again we hear of things that escalate to violence as it relates to drug interaction. Man, that's just a horrible shame.
I don't want to say that you asked my opinion about that, and I gave information for us. I want to make it clear, our evidence of the drug use is not as strong as some of the other evidence. I think that's the most compelling motive.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't think it was just drugs. I think there was an issue, based on some of the statements we heard. There was an issue of disrespect. You were supposed to be my friend, you come into my house, you steal. We're going to send a message. So I don't think it was just an economic dispute over the value of drugs. I do think there were some conflicting emotions and motivations involved in this case.
But to escalate to execution-style murder is quite a leap. That's a leap for most people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's typical that after a case, you and other people will sit and talk to jurors. I really want to know, what did they have to say? Was this difficult for them to sit through emotionally and listen to this?
Oh yeah. There's no question, but these cases are hard on the jurors. But I will say, talking to this jury, one thing is they did not go on tangents when we talked about things. They had very interesting, penetrating questions and observations. They had a good handle on the DNA evidence of the case, asked why we didn't do more DNA testing on some of the evidence we had, and we explained to them the state crime lab gives us a limit. We can only get so many items in a case tested. They were as upset as I'm sure the viewers are listening to this, that we had that type of limit on our resources. They actually looked at the videos very closely. They noticed some things that I would never have guessed that they would have noticed. and they actually had a couple of theories or observations that I think didn't occur to the defense, the prosecution, or the detectives on the case. This was one of the smartest juries that I've ever talked to.
Wow, that's impressive. That's good to hear. That there's an aspect, there are many aspects that work well, but that is a good system to be called.
I don't want to insult past jurors.
No, no, no,
I will
of course
say
not.
I am a firm. Some people get frustrated with the jury system. I worked with juries for 30 years, and I am a firm believer that juries do an excellent job and get it right almost the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Well, most of the people that I have talked to that have served on a jury found it to be really satisfying. They learned a lot about the court system. I mean, Andy, you live it every day. Nothing seems unusual to you, but for the rest of us who hardly ever go into a courtroom, that's quite an introduction to the process, for sure. What else did the jury have to say? Anything? Anything else that really stuck out to you as interesting?
Just another example is their deputy clerk was in. She came in. She wanted to hear what they had to say, and they actually complimented her and say, "And you have a very difficult job keeping all the exhibits and the photos organized." I think she corrected the judge at one time about something, and they actually noticed that and actually gave her applause. So
wow.
To me, it was and you say, "I never see anything new." That was the first time I've seen
wow.
jurors go out of the way to actually give a very nice, spontaneous applause when one of the jurors mentioned that she had done such a great job.
Hmm. Andy, how do you deal with such, these are sad cases. This is sad. This is horrible. 3 people, young people, gone.
Oh, that's the challenge. And then in the work with Miss McRoberts, Detective Cantu and I including Saturdays and Sundays, I think we had a day off for 5 or 6 weeks before the trial. So you get tired and you're working hard, and then the families come to the point where they say, "We're not worried. We know you're going to do the right thing," which is nice to hear, but somebody puts an extra pressure on us. And the other thing too is there's no good result.
Yeah.
We don't bring the victims back to life with a guilty verdict. The parents and grandparents and 2 of the victims had children, but they're still orphans after the verdict. And that takes away any sense of joy or happiness you have getting a verdict, because it's still, at the end of the day, it remains a very sad situation.
What was the reaction of of Fransisco when the guilty verdict came back?
Well, you're a good cross-examiner, Christine, because you're going to find out something. I don't know if it's a matter of respect or privacy or whatever, but I make a point not to look at the defense reaction when there's a verdict. And that's just been the way I have, and so I just don't know what his reaction was.
All right. You were talking about the various people that worked on the case that you have a lot of respect for. I want to talk a little bit now about crime victim assistance that is provided out of your office. And as I understand it, it's not necessarily to help victims or witnesses like with their electric bill or something like that, but it is really to guide them through their part in the legal process. Is that a fair description?
That's part of it, though. Sometimes we can pay, for example, the state can pay for the funerals, and then for assault victims, we can get restitution ordered, and we can get some compensation for a special fund to pay some expenses. And the nice thing about this program is it's not funded by tax dollars. It's funded by by penalties and assessments against criminal offenders. So it is a kind of a just funding system. But you are right that a large part of their job is to make victims and victims' families feel comfortable through a system which at sometimes probably doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's also at a low point in their life.
So people in your office are keeping these folks alert as to when things are happening, that type of thing. And after a case is over, will they still have contact with those people? Like if somebody is getting out of prison, or if they're being moved, or if there's some, let's say the person dies.
There's a separate program through the state that actually our office helps them get enrolled in the program, so they are notified ahead of time if somebody's going to be changing institutions or is going to be released. And so we try to keep them in the loop, and then follow up on other cases with restitution, things like that.
How does this, I mean, you've handled a lot of horrible cases, really, crimes, awful, horrific, and it seems unusual. We kind of think that we are protected from some of that because we live in a smaller community. Even at 250,000, we think we're a smaller community.
Right.
How does this case, you know, is there something about this case that stuck out to you as extremely unusual or different, or do you just put it in the category of another awful case?
Well, I think all cases are awful in their own way. Didn't Tolstoy or Dostoevsky have something like that? They said all happy families are the same in their own way. I mean, but I will say on this case that two things that struck me. One was viewing the autopsy and photos of Abigail's unborn child. That took me aback, and unfortunately that's going to stay with me forever. I think the other thing that struck me about this case is the sincere fear that most of our witnesses had to testify, given the circumstances of the case. And we spent a lot of time going to people's homes, talking with them, and explaining why they needed to testify, and offering them assurances that testifying in the trial is the right thing to do. And I know we have the power to make people do things and force things, but in my experience that doesn't work. And these are good people, and so we spend a lot of time working with them, trying to obey their concerns.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take another break here, and I really want to encourage you to call and ask Andy a question or make a comment. Wait until we get right back. Go ahead and put the number in your phone, 509-547-8726, and we'll take your call when we get back. Stay with us.